The moment I saw them walk through the door together, something inside me shifted. There's a peculiar clarity that washes over you when you watch your husband of 7 years guide his mistress into your birthday celebration with his hand hovering just above the small of her back, not quite touching, but intimate in a way only I would recognize. My heartbeat remained surprisingly steady as I smiled and continued greeting guests, champagne flute clutched perhaps a bit too tightly in my hand. They thought they were so clever, arriving separately but within minutes of each other, exchanging those quick glances that were meant to go unnoticed. What they didn't realize was that I'd been counting down to this evening for weeks. My 34th birthday wouldn't be remembered for the elegant decorations transforming our backyard or the catered food that had cost a small fortune. No, this night would go down in our social circle's history for what was about to unfold when I picked up that microphone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Olivia Chen. Until 3 months ago, I believed I was living a charmed life with my husband Derek in our renovated craftsman home in Portland. We'd met during our final year at University of Oregon, where I was studying communications, and he was finishing his business degree. Our story had all the elements of a perfect rom-com meet-cute. We reached for the same book in the library stacks, his coffee spilled on my favorite sweater, and somehow that disaster turned into dinner that same night. 8 years later, were settled in our careers. Me as the communications director for a nonprofit focused on women's education, him climbing the corporate ladder at a tech startup that had recently gone public. Everyone envied our relationship. Derek remembered every anniversary with thoughtful gifts. He brought me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. We still had date nights every Thursday, trying new restaurants across the city. My friends jokingly called him the unicorn because supposedly perfect husbands like him didn't exist in the wild. And I believed it too, until the day I borrowed his laptop to finish a presentation when mine crashed. I never intended to snoop. I've always respected Derek's privacy, believing that trust forms the foundation of any successful marriage. But when his messaging app pinged while I was working, a preview appeared in the corner of the screen. Can't wait for Thursday. Wear that black thing that drives me crazy. The message was from someone named Cam, Work Project, and it stopped. My breath. For 20 minutes, I sat frozen, cursor hovering over the notification. Every rational part of me wanted to close it, to preserve the sanctity of the life we'd built. But another voice, one I barely recognized as my own, whispered that I deserved to know the truth. With trembling fingers, I clicked. What followed was an education in betrayal. The conversation history between my husband and Cam, whose real name turned out to be Camilla, spanned 6 months. They weren't just sleeping together, they were planning outings, sharing private jokes, and discussing intimate details of their relationship. Thursday, I realized with a wave of nausea, was our date night. The night Derek had recently suggested we mix up by occasionally doing separate activities to maintain our independence. I scrolled through months of messages, each one cutting deeper than the last. The timestamps aligned perfectly with Derek's late meetings and weekend work emergencies. There were complaints about me, how I was too focused on my career, how I didn't understand the pressure he was under, how I'd become predictable. Reading your husband's critiques of your personality through messages to his lover creates a unique kind of heartbreak. It's like discovering you've been living in a funhouse, mirror version of your marriage, distorted in ways you never imagined. The worst part wasn't the evidence of physical infidelity, though those messages burned themselves into my memory. No, what truly shattered me was realizing how much of himself Derek gave to her. The thoughtful observations, the inside jokes, the vulnerability, all things I thought were reserved for us. All things I thought made our connection special. I closed the laptop without confronting him. Something primitive and self-protective took over, telling me to gather more information before showing my hand. That night, when Derek came home with takeout from my favorite Thai place, I performed the role of adoring wife with an Oscar-worthy precision that frightened me. I laughed at his jokes, asked about his day, and even initiated sex, all while feeling like I was floating outside my body, watching this stranger who looked like my husband touch this shell that used to be me. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. As soon as Derek left for the office, I began my investigation. I didn't want to believe what I'd seen. Perhaps there was an explanation. Some work project with uncomfortable boundaries. A misunderstanding I'd blown out of proportion. I needed unequivocal proof before I demolished the life we'd built. It didn't take long to find it. Derek had always been meticulous about most things, but he'd grown complacent in his deception. His passwords hadn't changed since we first moved in together. His location history showed regular visits to an apartment complex across town. Our shared credit card statement revealed dinners for 2 on nights he was supposedly working late, a weekend booking at a coastal inn when he'd claimed to be at a business retreat, and, this one stung particularly, a jewelry purchase from a boutique I'd never received a gift from. By noon, I had confirmed beyond any doubt that my husband was having an affair with Camila Rodriguez, the new marketing director who'd joined his company 4 months earlier. Social media filled in the blanks. She was 31, 2 years younger than me, with a sleek bob and a penchant for quote posts about seizing life's opportunities. Her Instagram showed subtle evidence of their relationship. A photo of a sunset from what I recognized as the Coastal Inn. A close-up of a cocktail at the hidden bar Derek had discovered on our anniversary, and apparently now shared with her. A hollowness spread through my chest as I scrolled through her life. What did she have that I lacked? Was it just the novelty of someone new? Had our relationship been as meaningless to Derek as it now seemed to be? Questions circled my mind, like vultures, picking at the carcass of my self-esteem. Around 2 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was my best friend Zoe, calling to check if I needed anything while I was sick. Zoe and I had been inseparable since college orientation. She knew me better than anyone, which meant she immediately detected the flatness in my voice. "Okay, what's really going on?" she demanded. "And don't say nothing because I can literally hear you crumbling through the phone." The dam broke. Words poured out of me in a jumbled, tearful mess as I explained everything I'd discovered. Zoe listened without interrupting, a rare feat, for her normally exuberant personality. When I finally ran out of words, the silence stretched between us for several seconds. "I'm coming over," she said finally. "Don't move, and don't do anything drastic until I get there." 40 minutes later, Zoe arrived with reinforcements, a bottle of expensive tequila, ice cream, and her laptop. "We're approaching this systematically," she announced, setting up what she called cheater investigation headquarters on my dining table. First, we drink. Then, we strategize. Zoe worked as a digital marketing strategist, which meant she had skills I lacked, particularly when it came to online investigation. "Amateur," she muttered, as I showed her what I'd found so far. "Let's really see what's going on." For the next 3 hours, we dug deeper. Zoe had techniques I'd never considered. Cross-referencing check-ins, analyzing photo metadata, even accessing archived versions of Camilla's social media profiles. With each new discovery, the timeline became clearer. What had begun as workplace flirtation had evolved into full-blown affair territory around the time Derek's company had their holiday party, the same party he'd insisted I skip because it would be boring shop talk. "You could confront him tonight," Zoe suggested, pouring us each another shot. "Pack his bags, change the locks, full scorched earth policy." I considered it, imagining the satisfaction of watching Derek's face crumble as I laid out the evidence. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride, or perhaps a deeper desire for a resolution that would leave me feeling empowered rather than just angry. "No," I said slowly, an idea taking shape. "I want him to understand exactly what he's losing, and I want it to happen on my terms." My birthday was 3 weeks away. Derek had already begun planning what he called a special celebration with close friends and family in our backyard. He'd been surprisingly insistent about the guest list, mentioning that we should include people from his work to expand our social circle. Now I understood why. He wanted to normalize Camilla's presence in our lives, perhaps setting the stage for eventually going public with their relationship. "What if," I said to Zoe, refilling our glasses, "we let him throw exactly the party he wants, but with a finale he's not expecting?" Zoe's slow smile matched my own. "I'm listening." Our plan took shape over the following days. On the surface, I remained the same loving wife Derek expected. I expressed excitement about the birthday, plans, approved the guest list, which, yes, included Camilla, and continued our regular routines. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But beneath this performance, I was methodically gathering evidence and preparing for what Zoe dramatically called the reckoning. I hired a private investigator named Marta, a no-nonsense former police detective who specialized in infidelity cases. "Just to be clear," she said during our first meeting at a cafe far from my usual haunts, "my job is to gather legally admissible evidence. What you do with that evidence is your business, but I don't participate in anything that could be construed as harassment or public humiliation. I don't want to harass anyone," I assured her. "I just want irrefutable proof, for myself as much as for anyone else." Marta's work proved invaluable. Within 10 days, she provided me with surveillance photos, timestamps, and documentation that filled in the remaining gaps in the timeline. Derek and Camilla weren't just having a casual fling. They had established routines, favorite places, and this discovery knocked the wind out of me. Apparent plans for the future. Marta had photographed them shopping for furniture together, at a store across town, with Derek pointing at a dining table similar to one I'd been asking to replace in our home for months. While Marta handled the surveillance, I focused on understanding our financial situation. Derek and I maintained joint accounts for household expenses, but also had separate accounts for personal spending and investments. I'd always trusted him to manage our joint investments, viewing his business background as superior to my own financial knowledge. Now I wondered if that trust had been misplaced. I made an appointment with a financial advisor named Teresa, explaining my situation with clinical detachment that surprised even me. Teresa helped me trace our assets and investments, ensuring I understood exactly what we owned individually and jointly. To my relief, Derek hadn't done anything underhanded with our money, at least not yet. But Teresa's guidance helped me protect myself, subtly moving some assets and documenting everything meticulously. "I hope you never need this," she said, handing me a folder of financial documentation. "But if you do, you'll be glad you prepared." My next step was consulting with a lawyer. Richard Kim had handled my parents' divorce when I was in college, approaching a messy situation with compassion and fierce competence. Though I hadn't spoken to him in years, he remembered me immediately and agreed to meet on short notice. Oregon is a no-fault divorce state, he explained during our consultation. That means the affair itself doesn't impact the division of assets. However, he continued, flipping through the evidence I'd provided, these expenses charged to joint accounts for the affair could potentially be considered marital waste. We discussed scenarios and strategies. Richard, like Marta, emphasized that his role was to protect my interests legally, not to facilitate public revenge. "The most satisfying revenge is living well after this is over," he advised. "Focus on setting yourself up for that future." I took his words to heart, but still proceeded with my birthday party plan. Something in me needed closure that legal proceedings alone couldn't provide. I needed Derek, and yes, Camilla too, to face what they had done, not just in legal documents, but in human terms. As my birthday approached, I maintained my performance flawlessly. If Derek noticed anything unusual in my behavior, he didn't. mention it. He seemed energized, even especially attentive, perhaps compensating for his guilt or simply enjoying the thrill of having both women in his life. Either way, his solicitousness made my skin crawl. The man who brought me coffee in bed and asked detailed questions about my day was the same man who complained to his lover that I was obsessed with my work and never truly present. 2 days before the party, I met with Zoe for final preparations. We'd rented a high-quality projector and screen, ostensibly for a birthday slideshow Derek had suggested as a walk down memory lane. Zoe, who had professional experience with audio-visual equipment, ensured everything would run smoothly when the moment came. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" she asked, studying my face. "It's not too late to change course. We could still go with a private confrontation or just have the lawyers handle everything." I considered her question seriously. The plan we'd developed wasn't about humiliation for its own sake. It was about truth, undeniable, unfiltered truth in the face of months of lies. It was about reclaiming my narrative from the one Derek was constructing, where I was gradually being written out. "I'm sure," I said finally. "They've been making a fool of me for months. I don't want to hide what happened like I'm ashamed or at fault. I want this done in a way that leaves no room for Derek to rewrite history afterward." Zoe nodded, squeezing my hand. "Then let's make sure it's flawless." The day of my birthday dawned bright and clear. Perfect weather for the outdoor celebration Derek had planned. He was up early, coordinating with the caterers and setting up tables in our backyard. I watched him from our bedroom window, this stranger I'd shared a bed with for 7 years, and felt a curious detachment. The pain was still there, a constant throb beneath my ribs, but it was overlaid with something new, a cold clarity and determination that carried me through my morning routine. "You shouldn't be seeing any of this," Derek protested when he found me in the kitchen, reviewing the party setup. "It's your birthday. You should be relaxing." "I want everything to be perfect today," I replied, kissing his cheek and noting how he smelled of unfamiliar cologne. "This party means a lot to me." His eyes softened with what looked like genuine affection, and for a moment, doubt crept in. Was I overreacting? Had I misinterpreted everything? But then my mind flashed to the messages, the photos, the lies stacked upon lies, and my resolve hardened once more. Guests began arriving at 4 p.m. I'd chosen a simple but elegant outfit, a deep blue dress that complemented my eyes and dark hair, paired with the sapphire earrings my parents had given me for graduation. Jewelry Derek hadn't selected, a small but meaningful choice. Our backyard had been transformed with string lights, floral arrangements, and elegantly set tables. Waitstaff circulated with champagne and appetizers while a jazz trio played softly, in the corner. From the outside, it appeared to be exactly what it claimed, a tasteful celebration of another year in a successful life. I greeted each guest warmly, accepting birthday wishes and compliments on the beautiful setting. My parents had flown in from Chicago, bringing tearful hugs and news from home. College friends mingled with work colleagues, creating the social mosaic of my life. Derek remained attentive at my side, the perfect host and devoted husband. Camilla arrived at 4:30, wearing a forest green wrap dress that subtly highlighted her figure without being inappropriate for a casual gathering. She carried a small, elegantly wrapped gift and wore an expression of friendly professional interest. If I hadn't known better, I would never have suspected this woman had been sleeping with my husband since December. "Happy birthday," she said, air kissing near my cheek. "Derek talks about you so much, I feel like we're already friends." "How lovely," I replied with a genuine smile, because in that moment, the absurdity struck me as almost funny. "I'm so glad you could make it. Derek's been eager to integrate his work friends into our social circle." A flicker of something, discomfort, confusion, crossed her face at my cordial tone. Perhaps she'd expected coolness or territorial behavior from me. Instead, I introduced her to several of my friends, playing the gracious hostess to perfection. As the evening progressed, I watched them navigate the party with what they thought was discretion. The careful non-attention they paid each other, the brief, meaningful glances when they thought no one was looking. At one point, I saw them near the drinks table, standing slightly closer than colleagues would normally stand, her hand brushing his as she reached for a napkin. The practiced choreography of their deception might have continued indefinitely if I hadn't decided to bring down the curtain on their performance. At 6 o'clock, after dinner had been served and before dessert, Derek clinked his glass for attention. This was the moment we'd planned for, his cue to introduce the birthday slideshow he'd supposedly prepared as a surprise. "If I could have everyone's attention," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. Conversations quieted as guests turned toward him. "As you all know, we're here to celebrate my incredible wife, Olivia." He turned to me, taking my hand with practiced tenderness. 7 years ago, I had the good fortune to marry this brilliant, beautiful woman, and every day since has been an adventure. I've put together a little walk down memory lane to celebrate not just this birthday, but the life we've built together. Guests murmured appreciatively as Derek nodded to Zoe, who stood ready by the projector. This was it, the moment of truth in more ways than one. I felt a strange calm settle over me as the screen illuminated with the first slide. Our wedding photo, both of us beaming with genuine joy and hope for the future. That happiness hadn't been a lie, which somehow made the current situation all the more tragic. "I have a surprise for you," I whispered to Derek, squeezing his hand one last time before releasing it. "I added a few slides to your presentation. I hope you don't mind." Derek's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered, giving me a look of confused amusement. "You added to my slideshow? When did you manage that?" "I have my ways," I replied, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Consider it a collaboration." The projector displayed photos from our early dating years, hiking in the Columbia River Gorge, cooking dinner in our first apartment, celebrating my first promotion with champagne on our tiny balcony. Each image chronicled our progression as a couple, carefully curated to tell the story of what appeared to be a perfect relationship. Soft ahs rippled through the crowd as particularly endearing moments appeared on screen. Derek stood beside me, his arm around my waist in a gesture that once would have felt protective, but now seemed performative. I could see Camilla from the corner of my eye, maintaining a carefully neutral expression as she watched our marital highlight reel. The images continued chronologically. Our honeymoon in Japan, buying our house, holidays with both our families, anniversary trips. I felt a genuine pang of grief watching these memories unfold. That happiness had been real, at least for me. When had it become insufficient for Derek? Then came the transition I'd prepared. The screen switched to what appeared to be a title, slide with elegant text. "The past 6 months, a different story." Derek's arm tensed around me. "This isn't part of my presentation," he whispered, voice tight with sudden alarm. "No," I agreed calmly. "It's mine." The next slide displayed a restaurant receipt from Pignolo's, an intimate Italian place downtown. The date showed January 17th, highlighted in red. "This was the night you said you were working late on the Franklin project," I narrated, my voice steady and clear. Apparently, the project required candlelit dinner and a 175 bottle of wine. Whispers rippled through the gathering. Confusion registered on many faces, but a few, including my closest friends who I'd confided in, watched with grim anticipation. Derek dropped his arm from my waist and stepped back. "Olivia, what are you doing?" he hissed. I didn't respond, simply nodding to Zoe, who advanced to the next slide. It showed a hotel receipt from the coast, dated over a weekend Derek had claimed to be at a business retreat in Seattle. "April 12th through 14th, I continued. "The Ocean Terrace Resort in Cannon Beach." Strange choice for a Seattle conference. I turned to Derek, whose face had drained of color. The deluxe ocean view suite looks lovely in the photos. Did you enjoy the soaking tub? You always said we should visit there for our anniversary. The atmosphere in the garden had transformed completely. The cheerful party buzz had given way to uncomfortable silence broken only by awkward whispers. My parents exchanged alarmed glances. Derek's brother stared at his shoes. Camilla had frozen near the dessert table, clutching her champagne flute like a lifeline. "This isn't appropriate," Derek said through clenched teeth, reaching for my arm. I sidestepped smoothly. "What's not appropriate, Derek? The affair or me talking about it?" The word affair detonated in the space between us. Several guests gasped. My mother placed her hand over her mouth. Derek's boss, who I'd specifically made sure was invited, raised his eyebrows in alarmed interest. The next slide appeared. A photograph taken by Marta's surveillance team capturing Derek and Camilla entering her apartment building, his hand intimately placed on the small of her back. The timestamp showed 10:37 p.m. on a Tuesday when Derek had texted he was stuck at the office reviewing quarterly projections. "For those who don't recognize her," I said, gesturing toward the image, "that's Camilla Rodriguez, Derek's colleague from work. She's here tonight, actually." I turned toward where she stood, now attempting to blend into the background. "Camilla, would you like to join us? Since you've been such an important part of my husband's life these past 6 months, it seems fitting you should be included in this retrospective." All eyes turned to Camilla, who looked as though she might be physically ill. Her complexion had taken on a greenish tinge beneath her tan, and she appeared to be calculating the distance to the nearest exit. "This is completely inappropriate," Derek said loudly, attempting to regain control of the situation. He turned to our guests with a strained smile. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Olivia's clearly upset about something, but this isn't the time or place." "Exactly which part is a misunderstanding, Derek?" I interrupted, my voice remaining remarkably level. "The part where you've been sleeping with your coworker since December? Or the part where you used our joint credit card to fund your dates? Or perhaps you're confused about the furniture shopping last weekend? The dining table was a particular surprise, since I've been asking to replace ours for ages." The next slide appeared. Derek and Camilla testing mattresses at a furniture store, his hand on her back as she lay down to test the firmness. The image was almost comically damning. "Stop this," Derek commanded, moving toward Zoe and the laptop. "Turn it off now." My friend Ryan, who had played rugby in college and maintained the physique, casually stepped between Derek and the projector. "I'd stay put if I were you, man," he advised quietly. I continued as though there had been no interruption. "What truly fascinates me is the careful scheduling. Thursday date nights with me, Tuesday evenings with Camilla. Meticulous calendar management. You even created a separate email account for your communications, though not separate enough, evidently." The slideshow advanced to screenshots of email, exchanges between them, with dates and subject lines visible, but the content blurred for propriety's sake. I didn't need to share the intimate details. The evidence of sustained deception was damning enough. "Olivia." My name was a plea now. Derek's composed facade crumbling as the full magnitude of what was happening dawned on him. His eyes darted around the gathering. Colleagues, friends, family members, all witnessing his humiliation in real time. "We should discuss this privately." "Like you've been privately discussing me with Camilla?" I countered, advancing to the next slide. A screenshot of text messages where Derek had described me as too career-focused and oblivious. I'd redacted other, more hurtful comments about my personality and our intimate life. Even in my anger, certain boundaries felt too sacred to violate. "You told her I was oblivious," I noted, unable to keep a tremor from my voice for the first time. "I suppose in that one respect you were right. I didn't want to see what was happening. But oblivion has its limits, Derek. Mine ended 3 weeks ago when I borrowed your laptop." The garden had become uncomfortably silent. Even the waitstaff had paused in their circulation, uncertain how to proceed amid the unfolding drama. In the distance, I could hear neighborhood children playing, their laughter a surreal counterpoint to the tension vibrating through our carefully decorated backyard. "I think," my father said, breaking the silence as he stood up from his chair, "that many of us should be going. This appears to be a private matter." "Actually, Robert," I said, addressing my father gently, "I'd prefer if you stayed. What happens next concerns family." I gave the broader gathering an apologetic smile. "But Dad's right that this isn't quite the birthday celebration many of you expected. Please feel free to take some dessert to go. The catering staff will pack containers." A murmur of awkward relief rippled through the crowd as people recognized they were being offered a graceful exit. Several guests immediately gathered their belongings, avoiding eye contact with Derek and me as they mumbled hasty goodbyes. Others lingered uncertainly, torn between social discomfort and morbid curiosity. Derek seized the opportunity to approach me, lowering his voice to an urgent whisper. "You've made your point. You've humiliated me. Can we please stop this now and talk like adults?" "We're just getting to the most interesting part," I replied, nodding to Zoe. The next slide displayed a bank statement with several transfers highlighted. "These are movements from our joint savings account to your personal checking account over the last 3 months," I explained. "Nearly $12,000 diverted from what we were supposedly saving for a home renovation? Curious timing, given your furniture shopping expeditions?" Derek's expression shifted from embarrassment to alarm. "That's not—" "I was moving. Money for investment purposes. You're making it sound sinister." "Investment in what, Derek? Your future with Camilla?" I gestured to the dwindling crowd. "You'll notice her husband isn't here tonight. According to social media, they separated 2 months ago. Rather convenient timing." Camilla finally found her voice. "I'm leaving," she announced, gathering her purse with trembling hands. "This is completely unprofessional and inappropriate." "Unprofessional," I repeated, genuine disbelief coloring my tone. "You've been sleeping with your married colleague, and my sense of professionalism is what concerns you." Zoe advanced to the next slide, a series of text messages between Derek and Camilla discussing their future plans. While some content was redacted, phrases like, "after things are settled with Olivia," and "once we're free to be together openly," were clearly visible. "You know, I keep returning to the timing," I continued, addressing the remaining guests as though conducting a business presentation. "My birthday party, which Derek insisted on planning. A gathering of our closest friends and family, plus select work colleagues. It seems this was meant to be some sort of— what? A debut of Camilla in our social circle? Preparation for the transition when you finally worked up the courage to leave me?" Derek's silence was confirmation enough. A small, petty part of me enjoyed watching him squirm, his carefully constructed narrative collapsing around him in real time. "Olivia, this isn't you," he finally said, attempting a different approach. "You're not vindictive or cruel. You're upset, and you have every right to be. But this public humiliation isn't the answer." "You're right that this isn't like me," I agreed. "The old Olivia would have confronted you privately, possibly even blamed herself for your wandering. Attention, she might have suggested counseling, fought to preserve the marriage at all costs." I shook my head. "But that Olivia disappeared the moment I read your messages to Camilla. This version of me isn't interested in protecting your dignity when you showed so little regard for mine." The next slide was unexpected. Not evidence of the affair, but a legal document. For those still with us, this is where the evening takes a turn, I announced. "This is a formal separation agreement prepared by my attorney. It outlines a fair division of our assets, taking into account the funds Derek has already diverted for personal use." Derek stared at the screen in disbelief. "You've been to a lawyer? Without telling me?" "Imagine that," I replied dryly. "Someone keeping secrets in this marriage. The remaining guests shifted uncomfortably. Only a handful remained. My parents, Derek's brother, a few close friends, and strangely, Derek's boss Edward, who watched the proceedings with undisguised interest. "I've taken the liberty of having copies prepared," I continued, nodding to Ryan, who distributed sealed envelopes to Derek, his brother, and my parents. "The terms are fair, Derek. The house will be sold, proceeds divided equally after the mortgage is settled. Retirement accounts remain separate, as they've always been. Joint accounts have already been frozen to prevent any further reallocation of funds." Derek's hands shook as he opened his envelope, scanning the contents with growing alarm. "You can't be serious. We need to discuss this. Counseling. Separation period. We've been together for 8 years. You're throwing everything away over one mistake." "6 months is not one mistake," I corrected. "It's approximately 180 daily choices to betray someone who trusted you completely." I looked around at the small group of witnesses. "I wanted you all here for this part because I need you to understand something. I am not the villain in this story. I didn't fail as a wife. I didn't drive Derek to another woman's arms. He made these choices freely, repeatedly, without ever giving me the opportunity to address whatever dissatisfaction he felt in our marriage." My voice finally cracked, emotion breaking through my carefully maintained composure. He wasn't even brave enough to end things honestly. Instead, he constructed elaborate lies, watched me continue building a life with him, all while systematically dismantling that same life behind my back. Derek's brother Michael cleared his throat. "Liv, no one thinks you're the villain here, but maybe the lawyers can handle the details without all of this." He gestured vaguely at the projection screen, which still displayed the separation agreement. "The lawyers will handle the details," I agreed. "But the narrative, who we were, what happened, why it ended, that belongs to me too. Derek doesn't get to control that story." I nodded to Zoe, who advanced to the final slide, a simple text that read, "New Beginnings," against a sunrise background. "I'd like to thank everyone who stayed," I said, my voice steadying once more. "Especially my parents, who raised me to believe in my own worth even when others don't recognize it." I turned to Derek, meeting his eyes directly. "I won't be staying in the house tonight. My things are already packed. You have until the end of the month to decide if you want to buy out my portion of the equity or proceed with the sale as outlined in the agreement." Derek stared at me, his expression a complex mixture of anger, embarrassment, and something that might have been genuine regret. "Where will you go?" "That's no longer your concern," I replied simply. Edward, Derek's boss, approached us, his expression carefully neutral. "I should be going," he said, extending his hand to me. "Olivia, I'm sorry for the circumstances, but I appreciate your thoroughness." He glanced meaningfully at Derek before adding, "The company has clear policies about disclosure of relationships between colleagues, especially between different levels of management. We'll need to discuss this on Monday, Derek." The implied, professional consequences hung in the air as Edward departed, nodding solemnly to the remaining guests. Camilla had vanished sometime during the presentation, slipping away unnoticed in the chaos. The catering staff had begun quietly dismantling the party, removing plates and folding tables with practiced efficiency. The string lights still glowed, cheerfully overhead, casting a warm glow that felt strangely at odds with the emotional devastation below. "You've destroyed everything," Derek said quietly once most people were out of earshot. "My reputation, my job, our marriage, all for what? Revenge?" "No," I corrected him. "For truth, for consequences, for my own self-respect." I removed my wedding ring, placing it gently on the table between us. "You destroyed our marriage the first time you lied to me about working late when you were really with her. Everything since then has just been evidence collection." My mother approached, placing a protective arm around my shoulders. "The car is packed, sweetheart. Whenever you're ready." I nodded gratefully, turning back to Derek one last time. My lawyer will contact yours on Monday. Please don't call or text me directly. Anything you need to communicate can go through the attorneys. Derek's face hardened, his initial shock giving way to defensive anger. You'll regret handling it this way. This vindictive public spectacle, it's beneath you, Olivia. What would have been your preferred method? I asked with genuine curiosity. A quiet, private separation where you controlled the narrative? Where friends wondered what I'd done wrong? Where you and Camilla could emerge as a couple after an appropriate interval, rewriting history to minimize your betrayal? I shook my head. That version of events might have been easier for you, but it would have been another lie. I've had enough lies for one marriage. I turned away from him then, allowing my mother to guide me through our home, soon to be just a house neither of us would live in, for the final time. Zoe and Ryan followed, carrying the technological evidence of Derek's betrayal. In the entry hall, I paused briefly, taking in the familiar surroundings that had once represented safety and partnership, but now felt like a beautiful facade concealing something rotten. Outside, my father waited in the car, engine running. My suitcases and essential belongings had been loaded earlier that day, while Derek was busy coordinating with the caterers. The planning that had gone into this exit struck me suddenly as both empowering and profoundly sad. So much strategic thinking just to extract myself from a relationship that had once been the center of my world. You okay? Zoe asked, squeezing my hand as we reached the driveway. No, I admitted. But I will be. I slid into the back seat of my parents' car, exhaling a breath that felt like I'd been holding it for weeks. As we pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back at the house, or the husband I was leaving behind. Instead, I focused on the road ahead, illuminated by headlights cutting through the gathering darkness. The confrontation I'd orchestrated had served its purpose. I'd reclaimed my story, refused to be cast as either villain or victim, and ensured that the truth, however painful, was acknowledged by those who mattered. But as the adrenaline of the evening began to fade, I felt the full weight of grief descend. Not just for the marriage I'd lost, but for the future I'd believed in so completely. My mother reached back from the front seat, clasping my hand in silent support. "Where to, sweetheart?" my father asked, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. "The Riverfront Hotel downtown," I replied. "I've booked a suite for the week while I figure out next steps." "You could come stay with us," my mother offered. "We're here for another 10 days. I shook my head. I need my own space right now, to process everything. The truth was, I craved solitude, a quiet place to finally release the tears I'd been suppressing throughout the meticulous execution of my plan. The hotel room represented neutral territory, somewhere unmarked by memories or expectations, where I could begin the process of reimagining my life without Derek at its center. As we drove through familiar streets that now seemed strangely altered, I realized that despite the pain cutting through me, another emotion was emerging from beneath the grief: relief. The exhausting vigilance of the past 3 weeks, maintaining a convincing performance while gathering evidence and preparing for tonight, had finally ended. The truth, with all its ugliness, had been exposed to the light. The next chapter remained unwritten, but at least it would be authentically mine. "You were magnificent back there," my father said quietly. "Handled the whole thing with dignity, despite the circumstances. Your definitions of dignity and magnificent must be different from most people's," I replied with a wan smile. "Pretty sure publicly exposing your husband's affair during your birthday party doesn't qualify as dignified in most etiquette books." "There's no dignified way to handle betrayal," my mother countered firmly. "You stood up for yourself. You refused to be gaslit or manipulated. I'm proud of you." Her approval soothed something raw inside me. My parents had always modeled a relationship based on mutual respect and honesty. Their marriage wasn't perfect. I'd witnessed plenty of arguments growing up, but their commitment to facing problems directly rather than through deception had shaped my own expectations. No wonder Derek's behavior had felt like such a fundamental violation. We pulled up to the hotel, its modern glass facade reflecting the city lights. The doorman approached to help with my luggage, and I felt a strange sense of dislocation, as though I were watching someone else's life unfold. A woman I didn't quite recognize yet, checking into a hotel alone on what should have been her celebration. A night. "We'll come by tomorrow," my mother promised as we said goodbye in the hotel lobby. "Brunch, if you're up for it." I nodded, touched by their concern but already craving the privacy of my room. After they left, I completed the check-in process mechanically, following the bellhop to a suite on the 14th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. "Can I get you anything else, ma'am?" he asked after placing my bags in the bedroom. "No, thank you," I replied, pressing a tip into his hand. When the door closed behind him, I stood motionless in the center of the unfamiliar room, taking in the generic hotel artwork, the pristine white duvet, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows. The silence enveloped me. No Derek moving about the house, no familiar creaks of our old hardwood floors, no ambient sounds I'd grown so accustomed to I barely noticed them anymore. I moved to the window, gazing out at Portland's skyline as tears finally began streaming down my face. Not delicate cinematic tears, but ugly, racking sobs that bent me forward, arms wrapped around my middle as though physically holding myself together. The grief poured out of me in waves, each one carrying memories now tainted. Our wedding day, holidays together, quiet Sunday mornings, the plans we'd made for a future that would never materialize. I cried for what had been lost, for the years invested, for the betrayal that had torn apart the future I'd envisioned. I cried for my own blindness, for the signs I'd missed or ignored. But beneath the sorrow, steel was forming, a determination that this betrayal would not define the rest of my story. Eventually, the tears subsided, leaving me physically and emotionally exhausted but somehow lighter. I washed my face with cold water, changed out of my party dress into comfortable pajamas, and ordered room service. Comfort food I rarely allowed myself. Truffle mac and cheese, a glass of expensive Cabernet, and chocolate lava cake. While waiting for my order, I scrolled through messages on my phone. Supportive texts from friends who'd witnessed the confrontation. Concerned check-ins from those who'd left earlier and heard fragments of what had happened. Multiple missed. Calls from Derek, which I ignored. A particularly touching message from Ryan. "Whatever you need, whenever you need it, just say the word." The most surprising message came from an unexpected source, Edward, Derek's boss. "Olivia, if you're open to it, I'd appreciate the chance to speak with you this week. There may be an opportunity at Westridge you'd be interested in discussing. Your strategic thinking and communication skills were evident tonight, however unconventional the demonstration." I stared at the message, unsure whether to laugh or cry at the bizarre professional opportunity arising from my personal catastrophe. The universe, it seemed, had a peculiar sense of timing. Room service arrived, and I ate overlooking the city, savoring flavors that seemed more vivid now that I wasn't performing the role of perfectly content wife. A strange thought occurred to me. When was the last time I'd made a decision solely based on my own preferences, uncomplicated by compromise or consideration of Derek's wishes? Even my career choices had been subtly shaped by our relationship, choosing local opportunities over potentially more fulfilling positions that might have required relocation, scaling back travel responsibilities to maintain our home life. I opened my laptop and began a new document titled Next Steps. The act of creating a framework, a plan for moving forward, soothed my analytical mind. I'd need a new place to live, preferably something completely different from our craftsman house, perhaps a modern downtown apartment or a tiny bungalow in a neighborhood we'd never considered. I'd need to establish new routines, reclaim friendships that had faded during my marriage, possibly explore professional opportunities I'd previously set aside. As I typed, a sense of possibility began to emerge through the pain. Not happiness, not yet, but the potential for it. Whatever Derek had been seeking with Camilla, whatever dissatisfaction had driven him to betray our relationship rather than address it honestly, reflected his limitations rather than mine. His choices had ended our marriage, but they didn't have to diminish my capacity for joy, growth, or even, eventually, trust. I closed my laptop and moved to the bedroom, finally allowing exhaustion to claim me. Tomorrow would bring practical matters, conversations with lawyers, concerned phone calls from friends, the 1,000 small tasks of dismantling a shared life. But tonight, in this anonymous hotel room with no traces of the life I was leaving behind, I gave myself permission to simply rest. As I drifted towards sleep, I realized that while Derek had shown me who he truly was, I had also discovered something vital about myself. I was stronger, more resilient, and more capable of radical honesty than I'd ever known. That knowledge, painful as its acquisition had been, would illuminate whatever path I chose next. Morning arrived with the disorienting sensation of waking in an unfamiliar place. For a few moments, I stared at the hotel ceiling, trying to reconcile the plush white bedding and anonymous furnishings with my usual surroundings. Then, reality crashed back. The birthday party, the slideshow, Derek's face as his deception unraveled publicly. The crushing weight of it all threatened to pin me to the mattress, but I forced myself to sit up. Survival, I decided, would begin with small victories, getting out of bed, showering, facing the day 1 hour at a time. The bathroom mirror reflected someone I barely recognized, eyes puffy from crying, hair tangled from fitful sleep. I leaned closer, studying this stranger who shared my features. So this is what the aftermath looks like, I murmured to my reflection. Not quite devastation, not quite liberation. Something in between, a painful metamorphosis with no guarantee of what would emerge. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Derek, again. 14 missed calls overnight and now a text. Please talk to me. What happened last night was unnecessary and cruel. We can work through this if you'll just be reasonable. Reasonable. The audacity of that word sent a fresh wave of anger through me. Was it reasonable to carry on a 6-month affair while maintaining the facade of a devoted husband? Was it reasonable to deplete our joint savings? Was it reasonable to expect me to dissolve my marriage quietly, conveniently, without disrupting his professional reputation? I typed a response, deleted it, then tried again. Finally, I settled on all communication through attorneys. I meant what I said. Then I blocked his number, an action that felt both terrifying and liberating. The hotel phone rang moments later. Apparently, Derek had figured out where I was staying. I let it go to voicemail. Whatever desperation or remorse he felt now was his burden to bear, not mine to alleviate. At 9:30, my parents arrived for brunch as promised. We ate at the hotel restaurant, a sleek space overlooking the river where the staff maintained a professional distance that felt soothing after the emotional maelstrom of the previous night. "How are you feeling?" my mother asked gently, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Like I've been hit by a truck," I admitted. "But also, relieved? Is that strange?" "Not at all," my father said. "You've been carrying this knowledge for weeks, planning, maintaining appearances. That's an enormous strain." My mother nodded. "And now it's done. The next part won't be easy either, but at least you're not living a lie anymore." Their understanding washed over me like a balm. In the 3 weeks since discovering Derek's betrayal, I'd maintained such rigid control, channeling my pain into methodical planning, evidence gathering, and preparation. Now, in the presence of their unconditional support, I felt the careful structure beginning to crack. I really thought he loved me, I said, my voice smaller than I intended. Even when I saw the evidence, part of me kept thinking there must be an explanation, something I was missing. That's because you're a person who loves honestly, my mother replied. It's hard to comprehend deception of that magnitude when it's not in your own nature. The strange thing is, I continued, pushing egg around my plate, I keep wondering when it started. Not the affair. The surveillance photos make that timeline clear. But the disconnection. When did I become someone he could lie to so easily? Was there a moment I missed? A conversation we should have had? My father shook his head. Don't do that to yourself, Liv. Derek's choices reflect his character, not your worth. Some people, when facing difficulty or dissatisfaction, turn toward their partner and work through it honestly. Others turn away and seek external validation. That's about their emotional maturity, not about what their partner did or didn't do. His words resonated with something fundamental, a truth I needed to hold on to during the difficult days ahead. Derek's betrayal wasn't something I had caused or deserved. It was the result of his choices, his character flaws, his inability to honor his commitments. After breakfast, my parents walked me back to my suite. We've extended our hotel reservation, my mother informed me. We'll stay until you're settled. Somewhere more permanent. The relief that flooded through me was immense. They lived across the country, and their presence, practical and emotional support as I navigated this transition, felt like the first piece of solid ground I'd found since the world shifted beneath my feet. Thank you, I said simply, hugging them both. I don't know what I'd do without you right now. You'd manage, my father said with certainty, but you don't have to do it alone. After they left, promising to return for dinner, I called my lawyer, Richard Kim. The documents have been delivered, I informed him, and the confrontation happened. I gathered as much from the voicemails I've received from Derek this morning, Richard replied dryly. He's retained counsel, Patricia. Winters. She's good, fair-minded. This doesn't have to get ugly from a legal perspective, Olivia. That's a relief, I said. I've said what I needed to say. Now I just want it finished as quickly and cleanly as possible. There will be mandatory waiting periods, paperwork, possibly a few negotiation sessions, Richard cautioned. But with the evidence we've gathered about the financial irregularities and the written agreement you've already proposed, we're in a strong position. Oregon's no-fault divorce laws will make this relatively straightforward. We discussed next steps, financial considerations, temporary arrangements, how to handle communications. Richard's matter-of-fact approach anchored me, transforming the overwhelming emotional tangle into discrete, manageable tasks. One more thing, I said before ending the call. Derek's boss reached out to me last night about a potential job opportunity. Would it be inappropriate to pursue that? Richard considered this. Legally, there's no conflict. Practically, it might be complicated. What kind of position are we talking about? I'm not sure yet, I admitted. He just mentioned my strategic thinking and communication skills and asked to meet. Intriguing, Richard mused. Keep me posted if anything develops there. After hanging up, I scrolled through more messages, friends checking in, offering spare rooms, expressing outrage on my behalf. Zoe had texted, "When you're ready for company, I've got wine, ice cream, and zero judgment about anything you might want to say or do or break." The support was overwhelming and necessary. For years, my identity had been partly defined by my relationship with Derek. We were Derek and Olivia, a unit, a known quantity in our social circle. Now that construct had shattered, and I was left to rediscover who just Olivia might be. My phone chimed with an email notification from Edward Barnes, Derek's boss. He suggested meeting for coffee the following afternoon at a cafe downtown. Professional curiosity overrode my hesitation, and I confirmed the appointment. Whatever, opportunity he had in mind. It certainly couldn't hurt to listen. The rest of the day passed in a blur of practical matters. I contacted my bank to ensure my personal accounts were secure. I spoke with a real estate agent about potentially listing the house. I researched short-term rentals that might bridge the gap between the hotel and a more permanent living situation. Each task completed felt like reclaiming a small piece of agency. That evening, dinner with my parents provided another anchor point in the churning sea of transition. We avoided dissecting the previous night's events, instead focusing on practical matters and occasionally venturing into neutral topics. A documentary my father had recently watched, my mother's garden plans for the summer, a book we'd all read. "Have you thought about what you want next?" my father asked over dessert. "Not just logistically, but for your life?" The question caught me off guard. In the whirlwind of discovery and planning, I'd focused entirely on ending what wasn't working. The idea of actively choosing what might come next felt both terrifying and exhilarating. "I'm meeting with Derek's boss tomorrow about a potential job opportunity," I shared. "And I've been thinking about looking at apartments downtown, something completely different from our house in Eastmoreland." "Those are good practical steps," my mother nodded. "But I think your father is asking about the bigger picture. What do you want your life to look like now that you're not constrained by Derek's preferences or the compromises of marriage?" I considered this. "I don't know yet," I admitted. For so long, every decision was filtered through the lens of our relationship. Would it work for both of us? Was it compatible with our long-term plans? I twirled my spoon in the remnants of my crème brûlée. It's strange to realize I can make choices based solely on what I want. "Take your time figuring it out," my father advised. "This transition period is difficult, but it's also an opportunity to intentionally design the next chapter." Design the next chapter. The phrase stuck with me as I returned to my hotel room that night. I'd always been organized, methodical, skills that had served me well in orchestrating my response to Derek's betrayal. Perhaps I could apply that same intentionality to rebuilding, creating a life that reflected my authentic desires rather than merely reacting to what had been lost. I opened my laptop and created a new document, different from the practical next steps list I'd started the night before. This one I titled Reclamation. Into it, I began typing things I'd always wanted to explore, but had somehow set aside during my marriage. Taking a photography course, learning conversational Spanish, traveling solo to Japan, applying for that fellowship program I'd talked myself out of 3 years ago because it would have required too much time away from home. As the list grew, I felt something unfamiliar stirring. Not happiness exactly, but possibility. The pain of Derek's betrayal hadn't diminished, but alongside it, tentative shoots of curiosity about what might come next were emerging from the scorched earth of my former life. I fell asleep that night with the laptop still open beside me. The document a testament to the fact that endings, however painful, sometimes make space for new beginnings. The next morning brought a fresh wave of anxiety as I prepared to meet Edward Barnes. Selecting an outfit felt oddly significant. I didn't want to appear broken by recent events, nor did I want to seem calculating or opportunistic. I settled on a tailored navy dress that projected confidence without seeming overly formal for a coffee meeting. The cafe Edward had suggested was in the Pearl District, an upscale establishment frequented by the city's business elite. I arrived 5 minutes early, choosing a table near the window that offered both privacy and a view of the bustling street outside. Edward arrived precisely on time, immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit that exuded corporate authority. In his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and keen eyes behind designer glasses, he had the polished appearance of someone accustomed to making high-stakes decisions. "Olivia," he greeted me with a firm handshake. "Thank you for meeting me, especially given the circumstances." "I was intrigued by your message," I replied honestly. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious why you'd reach out after what happened." Edward ordered an espresso before answering. "What happened at your birthday party was unfortunate on a personal level," he said carefully. "But professionally speaking, it revealed qualities that our organization values: strategic thinking, meticulous preparation, the ability to present complex information clearly, even under emotional duress." I wasn't sure whether to be flattered or disturbed by his assessment. "So, you're offering me a job because I effectively exposed my husband's affair?" A hint of a smile crossed his face. "I'm exploring whether you might be a good fit for a position that requires exactly those skills, albeit applied to more conventional business challenges." He leaned forward slightly. "Our communications director is leaving at the end of the month. The role involves managing both internal and external messaging, crisis communication, brand positioning, all areas where your background in nonprofit communication provides relevant experience." I took a sip of my latte, processing this unexpected turn. Wouldn't hiring me create an uncomfortable situation, given Derek's position at the company? "Derek no longer works for Westridge," Edward stated flatly. "The company policy on disclosure of relationships between colleagues at different management levels is very clear. His failure to report his relationship with Camilla, who directly reports to him, was grounds for immediate termination. Your presentation merely brought to light what should have been properly disclosed months ago." The news landed with a complex impact. Satisfaction at the professional consequences Derek faced, mixed with a strange sense of loss for the career he'd been so proud of. "I see," I managed. "That's clarifying. This has nothing to do with my personal feelings about what transpired between you and Derek," Edward continued. "This is strictly business. Your background is impressive, and your presentation, unorthodox as it was, demonstrated capabilities we need." "May I ask why the current communications director is leaving?" I inquired, professional curiosity overriding my personal turmoil. "She's relocating to be closer to family," Edward explained. "The transition has been planned for several months, which is why we're able to conduct a thorough search." We spent the next hour discussing the position in detail: responsibilities, expectations, compensation package. The role would represent a significant step up from my current position at the nonprofit, both in terms of scope and salary. It would also require me to essentially start over in a new industry, learning the intricacies of corporate communications after years in the nonprofit sector. "I appreciate your interest," I said as our meeting concluded. "This is a lot to consider, especially given everything else happening in my life right now." Edward nodded. "I understand completely. The formal interview process wouldn't begin for another 2 weeks, giving you time to decide if you want to pursue this. If you're interested, I can arrange for you to meet other members of the executive team." He handed me his business card, a heavy stock with minimalist design that screamed corporate prestige. "Whatever you decide, I admire how you've handled an extremely difficult situation." As I walked back to the hotel afterward, my mind buzzed with conflicting thoughts. Taking a position at Derek's former company felt both vindicating and complicated. Would accepting the role be seen as opportunistic? Would it prevent me from making a clean break from the whole painful chapter? Or was it the perfect way to reclaim my professional identity, turning personal catastrophe into career advancement? When I returned to my suite, I found Zoe waiting in the lobby, 2 large shopping bags at her feet. "Emergency retail therapy," she announced, holding them up. "Non-negotiable." For the first time since the confrontation, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. "How did you know that's exactly what I needed?" "Because I know you," she said simply. "And because distraction is a scientifically proven method for trauma recovery." I Googled it. We spent the afternoon in my suite, trying on the clothes she'd brought, pieces I might never have selected for myself, bolder and more distinctive than my usual style. A crimson blouse with an asymmetrical neckline, a leather jacket in butter-soft caramel, jeans with a higher waist than I typically wore. These aren't really me, I protested half-heartedly, examining my reflection in the crimson top. That's the point, Zoe replied, adjusting the neckline. The old you was partial to Derek's preferences, whether you realized it or not. This is about discovering who you are now. She was right, I realized with a start. Over the years, I'd gradually calibrated my choices to match Derek's stated and unstated preferences. He liked me in blues and greens that matched my eyes. He thought patterns were busy. He preferred classic, understated styles over anything too trendy or attention-grabbing. I met with Derek's boss today, I confessed, as Zoe helped me zip up a dress I would never have chosen on my own, a deep emerald with a neckline that highlighted my collarbones. He offered me a job. Well, the opportunity to interview for one. Zoe's eyebrows shot up. Seriously? That's either the most awkward or most brilliant career move ever. Which is it? I honestly don't know, I admitted. It's a huge step up. Professionally, communications director for Westridge. But is it weird, taking a position at the company that just fired my soon-to-be ex-husband? Weird? Maybe. Poetic justice? Definitely. Zoe perched on the edge of the bed. The real question is whether it's what you want, separate from the Derek situation altogether. I considered this. The position itself is fascinating. Corporate communications is different from nonprofit work, but the core skills translate. The compensation is significantly better. The company has a good reputation. But, Zoe prompted, hearing the hesitation in my voice, but I wonder if taking it would mean I'm still defining myself in relation to Derek, just in opposition now, instead of alignment. Would I be making this choice because it's right for me? Or because it feels like winning some cosmic competition he doesn't even know we're having? Zoe nodded thoughtfully. Valid question. But consider this. Maybe the opportunity itself is the universe's way of compensating you for all the crap you've been through. Maybe you deserve this win precisely because of what he put you through. Later that evening, after Zoe had gone and I'd carefully hung up my new wardrobe additions, I called my parents to update them on the job prospect. It sounds like a remarkable opportunity, my mother said cautiously. But is it what you want? There's no rush to make big decisions right now. That's just it, I replied. I'm not sure what I want anymore. For so long, what I wanted was inextricably tied to what we, Derek and I, wanted together. Now I have to figure out what just me wants. Give yourself time, my father advised. You don't have to have all the answers right away. That night, I dreamed of standing at a crossroads, paths extending in all directions like spokes on a wheel. Each path shimmered with possibility, but none was marked. In the dream, I felt not panic, but exhilaration, the vastness of choice, the freedom to select any direction. I woke with the dream still vivid, a sense of openness lingering where dread had resided the previous mornings. The pain hadn't vanished. Grief for my marriage still sat heavy in my chest. But alongside it now lived something new, curiosity about what might lie ahead. The next week unfolded in a series of practical steps. With Richard's guidance, I established a temporary financial arrangement that gave me access to funds while the divorce proceedings moved forward. I scheduled viewings of short-term rental apartments, narrowing my search to downtown locations that would represent a complete change from the residential neighborhood Derek and I had chosen together. Zoe accompanied me to the viewings, offering opinions with her characteristic bluntness. Too sterile, she declared, of a sleek high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows. Too fussy, was her assessment of a renovated Victorian with ornate moldings. The third property we visited was a converted warehouse loft in the Pearl District, open concept with exposed brick walls, enormous industrial windows, and polished concrete floors. The space was nothing like the traditional craftsman home I'd shared with Derek, with its separate rooms and period details. "This place is you," Zoe stated confidently as we wandered through the airy space. Open, strong, authentic. I wasn't sure if the loft was truly me or simply the opposite of what I'd known before, but something about the space resonated. The owner was offering a 6-month lease, perfect for my transitional needs. By the end of the viewing, I'd signed the paperwork and handed over a deposit. That evening, as I described the loft to my parents over dinner, I felt the first stirrings of excitement about this new chapter. It's completely different from anywhere I've ever lived, I explained. Industrial, urban, walking distance to everything. It sounds perfect for this transition period, my mother approved. When do you move in? Next week, I replied. It's furnished, which is ideal since I'm leaving most of our things with Derek for now. The house will need to be staged for selling anyway. The conversation shifted to my upcoming interview at Westridge. After careful consideration, I'd decided to pursue the opportunity, if only to discover whether it genuinely interested me. The formal process would involve meeting with several executives and presenting a communication strategy proposal. A challenge I found myself genuinely excited about, despite the complicated circumstances. Have you heard anything more from Derek? My father asked gently. I shook my head. Richard says Derek's lawyer has indicated he'll agree to the terms we proposed. Apparently, he just wants this resolved quickly. I felt a twinge of something. Not quite pain, not quite relief. I suspect he's eager to minimize further damage to his professional reputation. Are you okay with that? My mother asked, studying my face carefully. I considered the question. Was I okay with a relatively smooth divorce process, free from additional drama and conflict? Yes, I decided. I've said what I needed to say. I don't need a protracted legal battle to feel vindicated. The truth was, the public nature of our breakup had already provided a kind of catharsis. My friends and family knew exactly what had happened. I hadn't been forced to carry the burden of Derek's betrayal in silence, or to accept a narrative that minimized his actions. That transparency, painful as it had been in the moment, now felt like a gift. It eliminated the need to keep explaining, justifying, or defending my decision to end the marriage. 2 days later, I received an unexpected message from Camila Rodriguez. Seeing her name in my inbox sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system, my heart rate accelerating instantly. For several moments, I stared at the notification, debating whether to delete it unread. Curiosity eventually won out. Olivia, her message began. I understand if you delete this without reading further. You have every right to want nothing to do with me. But I need to apologize for my role in causing you pain. While Derek told me repeatedly that your marriage was effectively over and that you were only staying together for appearances, I should have questioned this narrative more thoroughly. The Derek I thought I knew turned out to be a fiction, and I realize now that you were dealing with the reality. I'm not asking for forgiveness or understanding, just offering an acknowledgement of the harm I participated in causing. I've ended all contact with Derek and am leaving Westridge for a position in Seattle. I wish you healing and better days ahead. Camilla. I read the message 3 times, emotions cycling rapidly between anger, vindication, and a strange sort of pity. The apology seemed genuine, if belated. The revelation that Derek had portrayed our marriage as already over wasn't surprising, but it still stung. Another layer of betrayal in his carefully constructed deception. After consideration, I wrote a brief reply. Camilla, thank you for your apology. While I can't offer forgiveness right now, I appreciate your acknowledgement and wish you well in Seattle. Some part of me hopes you'll be more discerning about married men in the future, not just for women like me, but for your own well-being. We both deserved better than the version of Derek we got. Olivia? Sending the response felt like closing another door on the painful chapter. Not with forgiveness exactly, but with a kind of closure that acknowledged our shared humanity despite the circumstances. That weekend, I met with the real estate agent at the house to discuss listing preparations. Derek had agreed to be absent during my visit, making it easier to approach the task with professional detachment. Walking through the home we'd shared felt surreal. Familiar spaces now viewed through the clinical lens of market value and selling points. The kitchen renovation you completed last year is a major asset, the agent noted as we toured the main floor. And the original hardwood floors throughout will definitely appeal to buyers in this neighborhood. I nodded, remembering the weekends. Derek and I had spent selecting cabinet finishes and tile patterns, arguing good-naturedly about whether to prioritize aesthetics or functionality. Those memories now felt like artifacts from someone else's life, recognizable but distant as, though viewed through thick glass. We should be able to list within 2 weeks, the agent continued, making notes on her tablet. The market in this neighborhood is still strong, even with rising interest rates. I expect we'll see multiple offers. Good, I replied, running, my hand along the kitchen island's quartz countertop one last time. The sooner this sells, the sooner we can both move forward. As I prepared to leave, I paused in the entryway, taking a final inventory of the space. Despite the pain associated with its ending, our marriage had contained genuine joy, growth, and love, at least for a time. The house had been the physical manifestation of that relationship, holding both its promise and, ultimately, its dissolution. Goodbye, I whispered to the empty rooms, acknowledging not just the physical space, but the life it had contained. Then I closed the door behind me, stepping into the warm spring sunshine and the uncertain, exhilarating territory of my unwritten future. The following Monday brought my formal interview at Westridge. I dressed in one of the new outfits Zoe had selected, the emerald dress that made me feel confident and distinctly myself. The company headquarters occupied several floors of a downtown skyscraper, its lobby a statement in corporate minimalism, soaring ceilings, abstract art, and the company logo rendered in brushed steel. The interview process was extensive. Conversations with HR, meetings with the marketing team I would oversee, a presentation of my communication strategy ideas to the executive committee. Throughout the day, I found myself genuinely engaged with the challenges the role presented, my mind clicking into a professional gear that felt refreshingly separate from my personal turmoil. Edward Barnes found me in the break room between meetings, pouring myself a much-needed coffee. "How's it going?" he asked, selecting a cup for himself. "Surprisingly well," I admitted. "Everyone's been extremely professional. No one has mentioned Derek or recent events. Because it's irrelevant to your qualifications," Edward stated simply. "Your presentation to the executive committee was impressive. Clear, strategic, innovative without being impractical." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely pleased by the validation, though I should note that if I'm offered this position, I'd want it to be absolutely clear that it's based on my professional qualifications, not as some sort of consolation prize. Edward's expression remained impassive, but something like respect flickered in his eyes. "I can assure you, Olivia, Westridge doesn't offer executive positions as consolation prizes. The fact that your personal situation brought your capabilities to my attention is circumstantial. The decision to pursue you as a candidate is entirely merit-based." By the end of the day, as I rode the elevator down to the lobby, I found myself hoping for an offer. Not because of any connection to Derek or my former life, but because the position itself excited me. The challenges it presented, the skills it would demand, the growth it would require. For the first time since discovering Derek's betrayal, I felt fully present in my professional identity, separate from my role as wronged wife or woman in transition. As I exited the building, I spotted a familiar figure waiting on the sidewalk. Derek, looking uncharacteristically disheveled in wrinkled khakis and an untucked button-down. My stomach clenched at the sight of him, fight-or-flight instincts immediately activating. "Olivia," he called, stepping toward me. "Please, just give me 5 minutes." I glanced around, acutely aware that we stood outside his former workplace, where colleagues might witness the interaction. "This isn't appropriate, Derek. We agreed to communicate through our attorneys." I know, he said quickly, hands raised in a placating gesture. "But I needed to see you face to face, just once, to tell you how sorry I am." He looked genuinely distressed, hair uncombed, dark circles under his eyes, the polished facade he'd always maintained now visibly cracking. Some distant part of me registered that this was likely the most authentic version of Derek I'd seen in months, possibly years. "You're only sorry because you got caught," I replied, keeping my voice low but firm. "If I hadn't found those messages, you'd still be lying to me daily." "That's not true," he insisted, desperation edging his voice. "I was going to end things with Camilla. I realized what a terrible mistake I was making." The claim was so patently false that a surprised laugh escaped me. "Is that what you're telling yourself? Because the evidence suggests you were planning a future with her, furniture shopping, financial preparations, gradually integrating her into our social circle. These aren't the actions of someone planning to end an affair." Derek's expression crumpled. "I've lost everything because of one stupid mistake. My job, my reputation, my marriage. Please, Liv, we could try counseling. A fresh start." For a moment, I studied the man I'd once believed would be my life partner, the person I'd trusted most in the world. There was genuine pain in his eyes, but I recognized it now for what it was. Grief for the consequences of his actions, not for the pain he'd caused me. "Derek," I said gently, "what you've lost isn't everything. It's the life you were pretending to want while actively undermining it with your choices. That's an important distinction." "What does that even mean?" he asked, frustration edging his tone. "It means you didn't actually want the life we were building. If you had, you wouldn't have systematically betrayed it for 6 months. What you're mourning isn't our marriage. It's the comfortable arrangement where you got to have both a supportive wife at home and an exciting affair elsewhere. That arrangement was never sustainable, regardless of whether I discovered it." He stared at me, something shifting in his expression as my words registered. "I did love you," he said finally, his voice smaller. "I still do." "Perhaps," I acknowledged, "but not in the way I deserve to be loved. Not with honesty or integrity or respect." I took a step back, creating physical distance to match the emotional chasm between us. "I need to go. Please respect the boundaries we've established. Any further communication should go through Richard." As I walked away, I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The encounter had confirmed something important. I no longer wanted what Derek represented. The life we'd shared, for all its apparent perfection, had been built on a foundation that had proven fundamentally unsound. Whatever came next for me, it would be constructed with greater authenticity, even if that meant embracing uncertainty and imperfection. My phone chimed with a message from Zoe. "Interview debrief dinner at 7? I want all the details." I smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. Around me, downtown Portland pulsed with end-of-day energy, people streaming from office buildings, outdoor cafe tables filling with colleagues unwinding over happy hour, cyclists navigating between cars in the warm, early evening light. For the first time since discovering Derek's betrayal, I felt fully present in the moment, neither dwelling on the painful past nor anxiously anticipating an uncertain future. Instead, I simply existed in the now, a woman walking through a city she loved, heading toward dinner with a friend who cherished her, contemplating professional opportunities that excited her. The road ahead remained undefined, full of decisions yet to be made and experiences yet to be lived. But I was beginning to understand that the undefined nature of that path wasn't something to fear. It was perhaps the greatest gift to emerge from the wreckage of what had been lost, the freedom to choose, to explore, to become. As I rounded the corner toward the restaurant where Zoe waited, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a storefront. Window, back straight, head high, moving with purpose. I barely recognized myself, this woman emerging from the chrysalis of comfortable coupledom into something more vibrant and self-defined. "There you are," I whispered to my reflection. Not a final version, not a fixed identity, but a woman in the process of becoming stronger, wiser, and infinitely more authentic than the person I'd been before. 3 weeks later, I stood in the center of my new loft, surrounded by a modest collection of boxes and newly purchased furniture. Sunlight streamed through the massive industrial windows, casting geometric patterns across the concrete floor. The space still felt foreign, too open, too urban, too unlike anything I'd chosen before. But that unfamiliarity now seemed appropriate. I was becoming someone new. Why shouldn't my environment reflect that transformation? Zoe arrived with a potted fiddle leaf fig tree, announcing it was a housewarming necessity as she maneuvered through the door. "Plants make a place feel lived in," she declared, setting the tree near the brightest window. "Plus, keeping something alive is therapeutic, or so my therapist claims." I laughed, appreciating her practical approach to healing. "Does your therapist also recommend wine at noon? Because I've got a bottle chilling." "If she doesn't, I need a new therapist." Zoe grinned, following me to the kitchen area where I'd already unpacked the essentials. The loft was a single large space with designated areas rather than separate rooms. Only the bathroom offered complete privacy. The kitchen occupied one corner, defined by a waterfall island and open shelving instead of upper cabinets. The sleeping area sat on a slightly raised platform near the back, partially screened by a bookshelf I'd positioned as a room divider. The living area featured a comfortable sectional facing both the windows and the exposed brick wall where I'd mounted a television. "I love what you've done with the place," Zoe commented, accepting the glass of chilled Pinot Gris I offered. "It's so you, or maybe it's so new you." "I'm not entirely sure who new me is yet," I admitted, leaning against the island. "But she apparently likes open spaces, industrial elements, and a surprising amount of plants." I gestured to the small collection of greenery I'd already accumulated, succulents on the windowsill, a trailing pothos on the bookshelf, and now Zoe's tree. "She also got the job at Westridge," Zoe reminded me, raising her glass in a toast. "To Corporate Communications Director Chen. May your strategic messaging always hit the mark." I clinked my glass against hers, still processing the reality of my new position. Edward had called personally to extend the offer, which included a compensation package significantly higher than I'd anticipated. I'd start in 2 weeks, enough time to settle into the loft and prepare mentally for the transition from nonprofit to corporate culture. "Have you heard anything more about Derek?" Zoe asked cautiously. I shook my head. "Not directly. Richard says the divorce proceedings are moving forward without complications. Derek signed off on the property division exactly as we proposed." I took a sip of wine, considering how to articulate the strange emotional landscape I now inhabited. It's almost anticlimactic after everything that happened. "Were you hoping for more drama?" Zoe asked, a skeptical eyebrow raised. "No, not at all. It's just, for weeks, everything was intense. Discovering the affair, gathering evidence, planning the confrontation. Then the actual party happened. And it was this huge emotional explosion. Now it's just paperwork and logistics. It feels weirdly mundane." "That's how endings often are," Zoe observed. "The climactic moment isn't actually the end. It's followed by all this practical aftermath that doesn't make for good storytelling, but takes up most of the actual time." Her insight resonated. The dramatic confrontation at my birthday party had provided a necessary catharsis, but the real work of ending a marriage happened in the quieter moments that followed. Dividing assets, establishing separate lives, processing grief in private spaces. Michael from Derek's office texted me yesterday, I shared, still unsure how I felt about the contact. Apparently, Derek's taken a position with a firm in Chicago. He's leaving next week. How do you feel about that? Zoe asked, studying my expression. I considered the question carefully. Relieved, mostly. It will be easier to move forward knowing we won't run into each other around town. And it makes the Westridge job less complicated. No secret part of you that's sad to see the final door close? Zoe pressed gently. I looked around the loft, at the life I was actively constructing from the remains of what had been destroyed. I think that door closed the moment I saw those messages on his laptop, I replied honestly. Everything since then has just been confirmation that closing it was the right decision. We spent the afternoon unpacking the remaining boxes and arranging my newly purchased belongings. I'd left most of our shared possessions with Derek, taking only what had been exclusively mine before the marriage, and a few sentimental items we'd explicitly agreed I should have. The furniture in the loft was entirely new, selected specifically for this space, this chapter, this emerging version of myself. As evening approached, more friends arrived for the impromptu housewarming. Ryan with homemade lasagna, Lisa with a practical toolkit, because new places always need fixing, and several others bearing gifts ranging from practical to whimsical. My parents had returned to Chicago the previous week, satisfied that I was sufficiently established in my new surroundings. But they'd sent a large package containing artwork they'd selected for the loft's expansive walls. Surrounded by these, people who had supported me through the most challenging period of my life, I felt a curious mixture of gratitude and independence. Their presence affirmed that I wasn't alone, while the new space declared my capacity to stand on my own. The task gathering evolved into an unplanned dinner party, with everyone finding places around the large dining table I'd positioned near the windows. Conversation flowed easily, touching occasionally on the events of recent weeks but primarily focusing on current projects, upcoming plans, and shared interests. No one treated me as fragile or defined me by what I'd endured, a gift more precious than any housewarming present. After everyone had gone, I stood at the windows watching the city lights flicker against the darkening sky. The loft felt different now, as though the evening's laughter and conversation had begun the process of transforming it from a stylish but impersonal space into a genuine home. My home, marked by my choices, reflecting my emerging preferences, rather than the compromises of partnership. My phone chimed with a message from Edward. Team looking forward to your start date. Calendar invite sent for orientation schedule. Welcome aboard. The simple professional courtesy felt grounding, a reminder that while one significant chapter of my life had ended, others were beginning. My identity had never been limited to Derek's wife, though the all-consuming nature of the marriage's collapse had temporarily overshadowed other aspects of who I was. Now those dimensions were re-emerging, along with new facets I hadn't yet fully explored. The following morning, I woke early, still adjusting to the way sunlight flooded the loft at dawn. Rather than pulling the blackout curtains I'd installed, I embraced the natural alarm clock, establishing a new routine that began with coffee on the small balcony overlooking the awakening city. My lawyer had scheduled a meeting to review the final divorce papers, which would be ready for signature the following week. 6 months from filing to completion, the minimum waiting period required by Oregon law. The speed with which a marriage could be legally dissolved struck me as both merciful and strangely inadequate, given the emotional complexity involved. After breakfast, I met with a financial advisor Teresa had recommended, someone specializing in post-divorce financial planning. For women, Christina Wang's office occupied the top floor of a renovated Victorian in Northwest Portland, its decor striking a balance between professional and approachable. The settlement structure is solid, Christina confirmed after reviewing the documents I'd brought. You're in a relatively advantageous position. No shared debt, clean division of assets, strong earning potential in your new role. What should I be focusing on now? I asked, taking notes as she spoke. Financial independence had always been important to me, but there was something particularly vital about establishing a robust foundation for this new chapter. First, retirement planning, Christina advised. Your current contributions are good, but with the increased compensation from your new position, we can optimize further. She outlined several strategies, explaining the tax implications and growth projections of each option. Second, establish an emergency fund separate from your regular savings, ideally 6 months of expenses. And finally, consider your medium-term goals. Are you planning to purchase property again? Further education? Career transitions? These horizons should inform your investment strategy. The conversation left me feeling empowered rather than overwhelmed. Christina's approach was educational rather than directive, providing me with the information needed to make informed decisions rather than simply telling me what to do. As I left her office, I realized how much of my financial life had been shaped by partnership considerations. Even though Derek and I had maintained separate accounts alongside our joint finances, major decisions had always been made collaboratively, sometimes with compromise that didn't fully align with my individual priorities. Now, every financial choice was entirely mine, a responsibility that felt liberating rather than burdensome. That afternoon, I visited a gallery in the Pearl District, drawn by an exhibition of contemporary photography. Art had always been a shared interest in my marriage to Derek, our tastes gradually converging over years of joint decisions about what would hang in our home. Now I found myself lingering before pieces that would never have made the cut in our shared collection. Abstract compositions, provocative themes, unexpected perspectives. "Interesting choice," a voice commented as I studied a particularly striking black and white photograph of urban decay. "Most people gravitate toward the color series first." I turned to find a tall man with silver-threaded dark hair and an artist's attentive gaze. His name tag identified him as Gabriel Martinez, the gallery owner. "I appreciate the stark contrasts," I replied, gesturing toward the photograph. "The way shadow and light create depth even without color." "Exactly what the artist intended." Gabriel nodded approvingly. "Lena uses black and white specifically to force the viewer to engage with texture and composition without the distraction of color." We fell into an easy conversation about the exhibition, Gabriel offering insights into the artist's techniques and inspirations, without the pushy sales approach I'd experienced in other galleries. When he eventually asked if I was looking to purchase, I surprised myself by nodding. "I've recently moved into a new space," I explained. "I'm starting fresh with my collection." Something in my phrasing must have communicated more than I intended, because Gabriel's expression softened with understanding. "Starting fresh can be both challenging and exhilarating," he observed. "Art helps define a space as uniquely yours." I left the gallery having purchased not only the black and white photograph that had initially caught my attention, but also a smaller, more intimate piece from the same photographer, a study of hands intertwined that somehow captured both connection and independence in a single frame. As I carried my carefully wrapped acquisitions back to the loft, I reflected on Gabriel's words. Starting fresh. The phrase had become something of a mantra in recent weeks, applied to everything from my living space to my career to my social life. But today was the first time I'd extended it to more aesthetic considerations. The art that would surround me, the beauty I chose to incorporate into my daily experience. Back at the loft, I spent time selecting the perfect placement for my new acquisitions, eventually hanging the larger photograph on the brick wall facing my bed and the smaller piece near the entryway. Something about their presence transformed the space further, adding layers of meaning and intention to what had initially been chosen primarily for function and general aesthetic appeal. That evening, I joined a virtual cooking class I'd impulsively signed up for the previous week. The experience was both amusing and surprisingly satisfying. 20 strangers following a chef's instructions via video conference, each in our separate kitchens yet sharing a communal experience. My attempts at handmade pasta were hilariously imperfect, but the process itself, the tactile engagement with the dough, the focus required for the unfamiliar task, provided a welcome respite from the weightier concerns that had dominated recent months. As I ate my oddly shaped but delicious pasta, I caught myself smiling at nothing in particular. The feeling wasn't exactly happiness. Too much remained unresolved. Too many adjustments still in progress for that simple label. But it was something adjacent to contentment, a quiet appreciation for the small pleasures that remained accessible, even amidst profound transition. My phone chimed with a notification from the real estate agent. The house had received multiple offers after its first weekend on the market, all above asking price. A decision would need to be made within 48 hours. I sent a quick acknowledgement, promising to review the offers the following day. The rapid interest should have been gratifying, validation of the improvements Derek and I had made to the property, but instead, it triggered an unexpected wave of melancholy. That house had represented so much: our shared future, our commitment, our belief in building something lasting together. Its swift transition from our home to attractive property asset felt like the final confirmation of how completely that shared vision had collapsed. I poured a glass of wine and moved to the balcony, watching twilight settle over the city as I processed this unexpected emotional response. My logical mind understood that selling the house was necessary and beneficial. Neither of us wanted to remain there, and the proceeds would provide financial cushion as we established separate lives. Yet some irrational part of me mourned the speed with which the physical embodiment of our relationship was being dismantled and transferred to strangers who knew nothing of what had transpired within those walls. The next morning, I woke determined to address the house sale with the same practical approach I'd applied to other aspects of the separation. After reviewing the offers with the agent via video conference, I selected the one with the fewest contingencies and fastest closing timeline. Even though it wasn't quite the highest bid, the agent conveyed my choice to Derek, who quickly agreed with my assessment. "Clean and simple," the agent commented, sounding pleased with the smooth transaction. "We should be able to close within 3 weeks." 3 weeks. Less than a month, until the final physical tie to my marriage would be severed. I thanked the agent for her efficiency, then spent several moments sitting quietly after the call ended, acknowledging the significance of this last practical step. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Final papers ready for signature tomorrow, 2 p.m. Available?" I confirmed the appointment, then opened my calendar to block the time. As I scrolled through the week ahead, I was struck by how quickly my schedule was filling with forward-looking commitments: orientation sessions at Westridge, a photography class I'd enrolled in, dinner with new acquaintances from the cooking class, a consultation about potential graduate programs I was considering. Life was continuing, evolving, presenting new opportunities and connections that had nothing to do with what I'd lost. This simple recognition felt profound. Not a dramatic epiphany, but a quiet acknowledgement that healing wasn't about returning to who I'd been before the betrayal, but about becoming someone new. Someone who incorporated that experience without being defined by it. The following day, I dressed with particular care for my appointment with Richard. A structured navy dress that projected confidence and self-possession, paired with the simple pearl earrings my grandmother had given me when I graduated college. The choice felt ceremonial somehow, an acknowledgement that while signing divorce papers might lack the social recognition of a wedding, it represented an equally significant transition deserving of intentional marking. Richard's office occupied the 10th floor of a downtown building, its decor balancing traditional legal gravitas with contemporary touches. His assistant ushered me into a conference room where the documents awaited, neatly arranged with yellow tabs indicating where signatures were required. "Derek signed yesterday," Richard informed me, his tone professional but gentle. "Once you've signed, I'll file everything with the court." Given the uncontested nature and the fact that all financial matters are already resolved, this should be the last step in the process. I nodded, taking the pen he offered. For a moment, I hesitated, overcome by the finality of what I was about to do. Not because I harbored any doubts about ending the marriage. That decision had been clear from the moment I discovered Derek's betrayal. But because signing these papers would officially close a chapter that had occupied nearly a decade of my life. "Take your time," Richard said quietly, recognizing my momentary hesitation. "This is a significant step." I drew a deep breath, centered myself, and began signing where indicated, my maiden name feeling both foreign and familiar as I wrote it repeatedly. With each signature, I felt a curious mixture of loss and liberation, grief and relief. When I reached the final page, I paused again before making the mark that would legally conclude my marriage. "It's done," I said softly, more to myself than to Richard, as I completed the final signature. "The court will process this within the week," he confirmed, gathering the documents. "I'll notify you when everything is finalized, though there shouldn't be any complications at this stage." As I left his office, stepping into the bright April afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not happy, exactly, but unburdened in a way that created space for happiness to eventually return. The sidewalks bustled with lunchtime crowds, people rushing between meetings, friends chatting animatedly at cafe tables, couriers navigating the flow on bicycles, ordinary life continuing all around me, reminding me that my experience, while personally seismic, was also fundamentally human, one of countless endings and beginnings happening every day in this city alone. I decided to walk back to the loft, rather than taking a ride share, wanting the physical movement and fresh air to help process the morning's significance. The route took me through a small park where spring had announced itself emphatically. Cherry trees in full bloom, their pink petals drifting like snow when the breeze stirred, daffodils nodding in bright clusters, the unmistakable energy of renewal permeating the space. Pausing on a bench beneath one of the flowering trees, I found myself thinking about cycles and seasons, the natural rhythms of beginning, flourishing, fading, and beginning again. My marriage had followed its own cycle, from hopeful inception, through growth and eventual decline to today's formal conclusion. What had felt like catastrophic rupture when I discovered Derek's betrayal now seemed more like a painful but necessary completion of a cycle that had run its course. This perspective didn't minimize the hurt or excuse Derek's choices, but it offered a framework that felt more sustainable than perpetual anger or victimhood. Some relationships were meant to last a lifetime. Others served their purpose within a specific chapter. Mine with Derek had given me experiences, growth, and connections that would remain part of me even as the relationship itself concluded. A notification chimed on my phone, an email from Westridge confirming my start date and welcoming me to the team. The juxtaposition felt appropriate, signing the papers that officially ended one significant commitment on the same day I received confirmation of a new beginning professionally. That evening, I met Zoe for dinner at a new restaurant downtown. The first time in weeks we'd gotten together without explicitly discussing Derek or the divorce. Instead, our conversation ranged across other topics: her recent promotion, my upcoming start at Westridge, a film festival we were both interested in attending, mutual friends we hadn't seen recently. "You seem different," Zoe observed as we shared a dessert. "More present." I considered her observation. "I feel more integrated," I replied after a moment. For weeks, it was like I was split into multiple versions of myself. The one who was falling apart privately, the one maintaining appearances publicly, the one methodically planning next steps. Now those fragments are coming back together into someone new. "I like this someone new," Zoe declared, raising her glass in a toast. "She's stronger, more authentic, and better at choosing desserts." She gestured to the chocolate torte between us, which I'd selected over her usual preference for fruit-based options. I laughed. clinking my glass against hers. Here's to discovering what else she might be good at. Walking home after dinner, I felt a sense of anticipation that had been absent during the early weeks following the separation. The future ahead remained largely undefined, full of possibilities both exciting and intimidating, but I no longer viewed that uncertainty with dread. Instead, I recognized it as space, room to explore, experiment, and intentionally shape what came next, rather than simply reacting to what had been lost. Back at the loft, I opened the balcony doors to let in the mild spring air and the ambient sounds of the city below. Portland at night had its own rhythm, not the constant pulse of larger metropolises, but a gentler cadence punctuated by occasional streetcar bells, distant music from rooftop bars, conversations drifting up from sidewalk tables. Standing at the railing, I reflected on how much had changed in such a relatively short time. 2 months ago, I'd been in a marriage I believed was solid, planning a future that Derek had already begun dismantling through his deception. Now I stood in a space that was entirely mine, legally single again, days away from starting a job that represented a significant career advancement, surrounded by people who had demonstrated their loyalty and support when it mattered most. The journey hadn't been one I would have chosen, but the destination was revealing itself to be rich with possibility. As I watched the city lights below, I felt something stirring that I hadn't experienced since before discovering Derek's betrayal, genuine curiosity about what tomorrow might bring, and the growing confidence that whatever it was, I had the strength to meet it as my authentic self. 6 months after the birthday party that changed everything, I stood in front of the mirror in my loft, adjusting the sleek black dress I'd chosen for tonight's event. My reflection showed someone both familiar and transformed, the same features, but a different energy, a confidence that hadn't been there before. The woman who stared back at me wore her hair differently now, styled in a modern bob that framed her face with effortless elegance. Her makeup was subtly bolder, her posture more assured, her eyes clearer. "You look incredible," said a deep voice from across the room. I turned to see Gabriel leaning against the bookshelf, his artist's gaze appraising me with obvious appreciation. In the 4 months since our first meeting at his gallery, he had become an unexpected but welcome presence in my life. First as a friend who shared my interest in art, then gradually as something more. "Are you sure this is appropriate for a corporate award ceremony?" I asked, smoothing the dress over my hips. "It feels more gallery opening than business function." Gabriel crossed the room to stand behind me, his hands resting lightly on my shoulders as we both faced the mirror. "It's perfect, professional but distinctive, exactly like your approach to the job." I smiled at our reflection, his tall frame complementing my more compact stature, his creative energy balancing my analytical tendencies. We made an unlikely pair in many ways, but somehow it worked. Gabriel's perspective as an artist and small business owner was refreshingly different from the corporate and nonprofit worlds I'd inhabited, offering new insights and challenging my assumptions in ways that felt invigorating rather than threatening. "I'm nervous," I admitted, reaching for the simple gold necklace on my dresser. "Being nominated for an industry award after only 6 months in the position feels premature." Gabriel took the necklace from my hands, carefully fastening it around my neck. "There's nothing premature about recognizing excellence," he countered. "The Westridge crisis communication strategy you developed was brilliant. Edward told me half the companies in Portland are studying it as a best practice model." My lips quirked at the mention of my boss. When Gabriel and I had first started dating, I'd been hesitant to introduce him to anyone from Westridge, afraid the connection might somehow link back to the Derek chapter I was trying to close. But Gabriel had met Edward at a charity auction, and the two had developed an unexpected rapport. Now they occasionally met for cigars and conversations that apparently included singing my professional praises. "The nomination is largely symbolic," I demurred. "They're acknowledging Westridge's turnaround after the data breach, not me specifically. Your modesty is charming but misplaced, Gabriel replied, his hands moving to adjust my necklace. Edward made it very clear that your communication strategy was the cornerstone of their recovery. Own your success, Olivia. His words echoed. Advice my therapist had given me during one of our weekly sessions. Dr. Winters had been helping me work through the aftermath of Derek's betrayal, focusing particularly on my tendency to minimize my achievements while maximizing my responsibility for failures. Notice when you deflect praise, she'd suggested. It's a pattern worth examining. I took a deep breath and reset. You're right. The strategy was effective, and I played a significant role in developing it. Better? Gabriel's smile warmed his eyes. Much better. Ready to go celebrate? The ceremony was being held at the Hawthorne Hotel's Grand Ballroom, a venue I hadn't visited since a nonprofit fundraiser 3 years earlier. As our rideshare pulled up to the entrance, I felt a momentary flutter of anxiety. Portland's business. Community wasn't enormous. There was always the possibility of encountering Derek at events like this. Second thoughts? Gabriel asked perceptively as I hesitated before exiting the car. Just the usual pre-event jitters, I replied, deciding not to voice my actual concern. In the months since finalizing the divorce, I'd worked hard to stop organizing my life around avoiding potential Derek encounters. If he happened to be there tonight, I would handle it with the same professional composure I brought to other challenging situations. The ballroom was elegantly decorated, with round tables surrounding a central stage and podium. Soft lighting created an atmosphere both formal and intimate, while a string quartet played unobtrusively in one corner. I spotted Edward immediately, his commanding presence drawing attention even in a room full of executive-level professionals. Olivia, he called, waving us over to the Westridge table. Perfect timing. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. Introductions were made as Gabriel and I joined Edward, his wife Marianne, and several other Westridge executives and their partners. The conversation flowed easily, centered on industry developments and upcoming projects rather than personal matters. In the 6 months I'd worked at Westridge, I'd come to appreciate the company's culture of professional focus, a welcome contrast to the more enmeshed environment at my previous nonprofit, where personal and professional boundaries often blurred. As we settled into our seats, I scanned the room automatically, a habit developed since the separation. No sign of Derek, which brought both relief and a twinge of irritation at myself for looking. According to mutual friends, he had indeed relocated to Chicago, accepting a position with a smaller firm after struggling to secure local employment following his departure from Westridge. Camilla had moved to Seattle as planned, apparently now engaged to someone she'd met there. These details reached me through the inevitable social grapevine, each update affecting me less than the last as my new life took more concrete shape. The awards portion of the evening began with the expected speeches, the association president welcoming attendees, sponsors being acknowledged, jokes about keeping acceptance remarks brief. I half-listened while mentally reviewing potential talking points in case our category was called. The Communications Strategy of the Year award had 5 nominees, each recognized for addressing significant corporate challenges through innovative approaches. And the nominees for Communications Strategy of the Year are... The presenter's voice snapped me back to full attention. Eastside Healthcare for their Community First rebranding campaign. Portland Harbor Shipping for their sustainability. Messaging Initiative, Westridge Technology for their data breach response strategy. I felt Edward's encouraging pat on my shoulder as our company's name was announced. The screen behind the presenter displayed key elements of each nominated strategy, including a slide showing the core messaging framework I'd developed for Westridge's response to a significant customer data breach that had occurred just weeks after I joined the company. The crisis had emerged suddenly, an overnight security incident compromising sensitive client information, and required immediate, transparent communication while still protecting the company's reputation and customer relationships. Drawing on crisis communications principles I'd studied but rarely implemented at such scale, I'd created a response framework built around 3 pillars: absolute transparency about what had happened, concrete action steps being taken, and meaningful commitment to prevention. The approach had transformed a potential company-ending disaster into an opportunity to demonstrate integrity and customer commitment. And the award goes to... The presenter paused dramatically, opening the envelope. With theatrical flair, Westridge Technology for their data breach response strategy. Our table erupted in applause as Edward stood, gesturing for me to join him. This hadn't been part of the plan. I'd expected him to accept the award as CEO, but he guided me firmly toward the stage. "This one's all yours," he murmured as we approached the podium. "You earned it." Suddenly, I was standing alone at the microphone, the award, a sleek crystal obelisk in my hands, facing a room full of Portland's business leaders. 6 months ago, this scenario would have terrified me. Now, after half a year of leading communications for a major technology firm through both crisis and recovery, it felt challenging but manageable. "Thank you for this recognition," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. When I joined Westridge 6 months ago, handling a major data breach wasn't exactly on my first-week wish list. Appreciative laughter rippled through the audience. But what could have been a devastating setback became an opportunity to demonstrate what Westridge truly values: honesty, accountability, and genuine commitment to making things right. This award recognizes not just a communications strategy, but an entire company's willingness to embrace radical transparency, even when it's uncomfortable. I continued with brief acknowledgments of the team members who had implemented the strategy across departments, concluding with thanks to Edward for entrusting a newcomer with such significant responsibility. As I stepped away from the podium, applause filled the room, followed by a standing ovation from the Westridge table. Returning to my seat, I caught Gabriel's expression, a mixture of pride and something deeper that made my heart flutter unexpectedly. He squeezed my hand as I sat down, leaning close to whisper, "Brilliant. Just like you." The remainder of the ceremony passed in a pleasant blur of networking, congratulations, and celebratory champagne. Several executives from other companies approached me with questions about the strategy or expressions of admiration for Westridge's handling of the crisis. I answered professionally while inwardly marveling at how different this version of myself felt from the woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal just 8 months earlier. Later, as Gabriel and I shared a rideshare back to my loft, I cradled the award in my lap, tracing its smooth edges with my fingertips. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, noticing my contemplative mood. "I was just thinking about trajectories," I replied. "How life can change so completely in such a relatively short time. Last year at this time, I thought I knew exactly where my life was headed, personally and professionally. Then everything imploded, and for a while, it felt like I was in free fall." Gabriel nodded, giving me space to continue. "But now, looking back, I realized that what felt like destruction was actually redirection. If Derek hadn't betrayed me, I'd never have accepted the Westridge position. I'd never have moved downtown. I'd never have walked into your gallery that day." "The universe works in mysterious ways," Gabriel suggested, his tone light, but his eyes serious. "I don't know if I'd give the universe that much credit for planning." I laughed. "But I do think sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beginning in disguise." We arrived at my loft, and Gabriel helped me from the car, his hand warm against mine in the cool evening air. Since we'd begun dating, we'd established a comfortable rhythm, some nights together, others apart, neither rushing toward cohabitation, nor avoiding deeper connection. The pace felt right for two people who valued both independence and partnership. Inside, I placed the award on my desk, where it caught the city lights streaming through the windows. Gabriel moved to the kitchen area, retrieving a bottle of wine we'd been saving for a special occasion. "This seems like the right moment for this," he said, showing me the label. A vintage Pinot Noir from a small Willamette Valley vineyard we'd visited on our second date. As he opened the bottle and poured 2 glasses, I kicked off my heels and moved to the balcony doors, sliding them open to let in the spring night air. Below, the city pulsed with weekend energy, music drifting from the restaurant on the corner, couples strolling along illuminated sidewalks, the occasional streetcar bell punctuating the urban symphony. Gabriel joined me, handing over a glass of wine. "To new beginnings," he toasted, touching his glass to mine. "And to unexpected redirections," I added. We sipped in comfortable silence, watching the city below. After a moment, Gabriel spoke again, his tone casual, but with an undercurrent that caught my attention. "I've been thinking about something," he began. "My lease is up next month." My pulse quickened slightly. We hadn't discussed living together, though we'd spent increasingly more nights at each other's places as our relationship deepened. "I'm not suggesting moving in together," he clarified quickly, reading my expression. "That's a conversation for another time, when we're both ready. But I am considering relocating my gallery to the space that just opened up 2 blocks from here. The foot traffic is better, the display lighting is superior, and..." He paused, his eyes meeting mine. "It would put me in your neighborhood." Relief mingled with genuine pleasure at the prospect. "I'd like that," I said simply. "You would?" He seemed surprised by my straightforward response. "Gabriel, in case you haven't noticed, I'm trying to be more direct about what I want these days," I explained with a smile. "Yes, I'd like having you closer. I enjoy your company. I appreciate how you respect my independence while still making it clear you want to be around me. And I like the idea of being able to stop by the gallery on my way home from work." His expression softened into the smile that still made my stomach flip pleasantly. "Then it's settled. I'll sign the lease tomorrow." Later that evening, as Gabriel slept beside me, I lay awake thinking about the day's events, the award, the professional recognition, the small but significant step forward in our relationship. Life had taken on a rhythm again, different from before, but increasingly comfortable. My weekly therapy sessions had decreased to bi-weekly, then monthly. The divorce had been finalized without complications. The house had sold quickly, providing both Derek and me with the financial cushion to establish separate lives. My phone chimed softly with a text notification. Careful not to wake Gabriel, I reached for it, expecting a late congratulations from Zoe or another friend who had heard about the award. Instead, the message was from a number I didn't immediately recognize. "Saw the announcement about your award. Congratulations. You deserve it. D. Derek." My breath caught momentarily as I stared at the simple message. After months of legal communication only, this direct personal contact felt jarring. I considered how to respond, or whether to respond at all. Finally, I typed, "Thank you." Those 2 words felt sufficient, acknowledging his gesture without inviting further conversation. As I set the phone down, I realized something significant. The message hadn't triggered the emotional turmoil I might have expected months earlier. No anger, no lingering hurt, no desire to prove anything. Just a simple recognition of a former connection that no longer defined my present or future. Beside me, Gabriel stirred slightly, his arm reaching instinctively to draw me closer. I settled against him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. Outside, the city had quieted, though never entirely. Portland at night maintained a gentle hum of activity, a persistent reminder of life continuing in all its complicated glory. 1 year ago, I had believed myself securely established in a life I understood, partnered with someone I trusted completely. The discovery of Derek's betrayal had shattered that certainty, forcing me to rebuild from fragments. The process had been painful, disorienting, sometimes overwhelming. But as I lay in the darkness, taking inventory of where those fragments had led, I recognized that what had emerged was not a diminished version of my former life, but something entirely new, and in many ways, more authentic. My career had expanded in ways I hadn't anticipated, moving from the comfortable familiarity of nonprofit communications to the more dynamic challenges of corporate strategy. My living space reflected my own aesthetic, rather than a negotiated compromise. My social circle had both contracted and expanded, some relationships deepening through crisis while others fell away, making room for new connections. And then there was Gabriel, so different from Derek in ways that now seemed significant. Where Derek had been polished and conventional, Gabriel approached life with an artist's perspective, valuing authenticity over appearance. Where Derek had ultimately proven unwilling to address difficulties directly, preferring deception to honest confrontation, Gabriel brought a refreshing directness to our relationship, naming challenges as they arose and working through them collaboratively. Most importantly, my relationship with myself had transformed. The woman who had discovered her husband's messages that fateful day had defined herself substantially through her marriage, measuring her success partly by the stability and appearance of that partnership. The woman I was becoming defined herself, more independently, through her own accomplishments, choices, and authentic desires. Morning arrived with soft light filtering through curtains I'd deliberately left partially open, gradually illuminating the bedroom. Gabriel was still asleep, one arm draped across my waist, his features relaxed in the growing daylight. I studied him for a moment, appreciating the simple intimacy of shared sleep, a vulnerability I'd once taken for granted and now recognized as the gift it was. Carefully extracting myself from his embrace, I moved quietly to the kitchen to start coffee. It was Saturday, with no particular agenda beyond perhaps brunch at our favorite neighborhood spot and a visit to the farmer's market. These unstructured weekend mornings had become a cherished routine, the antithesis of my meticulously planned work week. As the coffee brewed, I stepped onto the balcony, breathing in the morning air. From this vantage point, I could see Mount Hood in the distance, its snow-capped peak glowing pink in the early light. The city below was quieter than usual, weekend rhythms replacing weekday urgency. A jogger passed on the street below, a couple walked their dog, a vendor set up an umbrella at the corner flower stand. Ordinary moments in ordinary lives. And yet, within that ordinariness lay profound possibility for connection, for growth, for unexpected joy and sorrow, for the thousand small choices that ultimately shape who we become. 8 months ago, I had experienced what felt like extraordinary trauma, the public unraveling of my marriage, the humiliation of betrayal, the disorientation of having to reimagine my entire future. Now, watching the city awaken below me, I recognized that the extraordinary lay not in the crisis itself, but in what had emerged from it. Not despite the pain, but because of it. The woman standing on this balcony was stronger than she had been before, more authentically herself, more capable of both independence and genuine connection. Gabriel appeared in the doorway, sleep-rumpled and smiling, 2 coffee mugs in hand. "Good morning, award winner," he said, offering me one of the mugs. I accepted it with a smile, making room for him beside me at the railing. "Good morning?" "Plans for today?" he asked, sipping his coffee. "Nothing specific," I replied, leaning slightly against his shoulder. "Just being here, present. That seems like enough." He nodded, understanding what I meant beyond the simple words. We stood together, watching the city, comfortable in shared silence. Below us, Portland continued its weekend rhythm. Above, the sky stretched clear and promising, and within me, a sense of peace had taken root, not the passive contentment I'd once mistaken for happiness, but something more vibrant and hard-won. The quiet certainty that whatever came next, I had the strength to meet it authentically, on my own terms. The birthday party that had exposed my husband's betrayal hadn't been an ending after all. It had been a beginning in disguise. The first page of a chapter I was still writing, one deliberate choice at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.